Hello, my name is Mary McAuliffe, and I want to talk to you today about my biography of Margaret Skinnider, which was published by UCD Press earlier this year. Who was Margaret Skinnider? Well, Margaret Skinnider enters and exits the history books as the female rebel who was wounded commanding a military action in the 1916 Rising. Coming of age among the Irish diaspora in Glasgow, where militancy in socialism, feminism, and Irish nationalism were inspirational ideologies, she was a suffragette, a trade union activist, a socialist, and a militant Irish nationalist. And today I want to share some excerpts of my research and my writing on Margaret Skinnider and introduce you to this rather fascinating woman. As I said, she comes of age among the Glasgow left-wing suffrage feminists, militant suffragettes, militant nationalists, and cultural nationalists. Her father was from Monaghan. Her mother was of Irish descent, and Skinnider was immersed in Irish history, in the Irish language from a very, very early age. But she was also immersed in feminism and militant feminism, particularly militant suffrage feminism during this period. Among her contemporaries was Helen Crawford, a socialist and a feminist, who leaves behind an unpublished diary. And I want to read you an excerpt from that. Crawford's diaries reveal the exciting and difficult life of a militant suffragette in Glasgow, while also revealing the political ideologies of a committed feminist and socialist. They also show a connection with and an understanding of the Irish struggle for independence. Events in Ireland, she wrote, disillusioned me as to the altruistic idealism of the ruling class. That ruling class always changed the weapons of attack just when the workers seemed near achieving their aim by constitutional means. As with women's suffrage, constitutional campaigns proved futile, taken as evidence of weakness and incompetence to be flouted and exploited. Another entry in her diary demonstrates a closer connection to the Irish in Glasgow. In July 1914, 2 suffragettes were imprisoned in the local Perth prison. As expected, the women went on hunger strike, and the Glasgow WSPU, members of the Women's Social and Political Union, the militant suffrage organisation, gathered outside to protest and to support the imprisoned women. On the 10th of July 1914, there was a royal visit of George V and Queen Mary to Glasgow, and Crawford wanted to protest at that. Her place was taken on the picket line at Perth Prison by, as she called her, Margaret Skinnider, an Irishwoman. Crawford wrote that Skinnider offered to take my place to enable me to go and see the procession. Margaret had no time for kings and queens. Crawford protested the royal visit, where she was rearrested, taken back by police to Perth Prison, and held there. She immediately went on hunger strike and was released after 5 days. This brief reference to the Irishwoman places Skinnider at the centre of militant suffrage action in Glasgow. But not only was Margaret central to militant suffrage action in Glasgow, she was also, by this time, by 1914, very much involved in militant nationalism, militant Irish nationalism. She had been involved in training na Fianna up to this point, but when the Irish Volunteers were set up in Glasgow in 1914, she becomes associated with them and then joins the Anne Devlin branch of Cumann na mBan when it's set up in Glasgow in 1915. Along with other members of the Anne Devlin branch, she collaborates with the Irish Volunteers in raids on the shipyards in Glasgow, which of course was very famous for its shipbuilding at that time, because there they could find bomb-making equipment, explosives and caps and materials needed, much needed by the Irish Volunteers in Dublin. And in 1915, when Margaret first visits Dublin, to stay with Countess Markievicz, she actually brings some of that bomb-making equipment with her to Dublin. She obviously impresses the members of the Irish Volunteers and the IRB. She meets in Dublin in 1915 and is back in Dublin again in 1916, just at the beginning of the Rising. She joins Michael Mallon and Countess Markievicz in the Royal College of Surgeons as a member of the Irish Citizen Army. And it is there on the Thursday of Easter week 1916 that she is wounded, leading an attack on a sniper nest which had been pinning down the garrison in the Royal College of Surgeons. Because of her wounds, she wasn't arrested when the surrender came. She actually was taken to St. Vincent's Hospital, where she spent a number of months recuperating. Once she leaves there, she goes back to Glasgow and then on to America. And it's in America I want to pick up with Margaret. She is part of the Irish Women's Republican tour in America. She is talking to Irish Americans about what happened in Dublin. She is fundraising. She is convincing those in Irish America to support a renewal of the Irish campaign for independence. And part of that was writing books to explain what had happened in 1916. Her book, which was published in 1917, is called Doing My Bit for Ireland. And in it, Margaret talks about her route to politicisation in Glasgow. And she also talks about Easter week 1916. It's a very important book because it is the first eyewitness account written by a woman rebel from the perspective of a woman rebel. And it is a perspective of the Royal College of Surgeons. So she talks about going to the GPO, but it's very much a perspective of the Royal College of Surgeons. And gender is very much part of what she talks about in Doing My Bit for Ireland. She said, gender is central and complex in Doing My Bit for Ireland. Skinner writes little of Cumann na mBan, the organisation of which she was an official member. Indeed, Cumann na mBan is the organisation she was very involved with through the War of Independence and Civil War. However, in Doing My Bit for Ireland, she barely mentions Cumann na mBan, other than that she joined the Anne Devlin branch in Glasgow in 1915. Her work with na Fianna, training the boys and passing as one of them in Dublin, was more important at this stage of her life as a militant. So much so that she included a photograph of herself in a Fianna uniform. In a 1917 letter to John O'Donnell, she proudly boasts of her boys in Glasgow who did their bit and promised to show him a photograph of them. She spends time describing her abilities to pass in many roles, as a Fianna boy, as a girl messenger, and as a uniformed sniper. She consciously inhabits these different roles in a gendered fashion. This gendered mimicry does suggest that for some activist women like Skinner, part of the attraction of revolutionary activism was because it permitted unorthodox modes of behaviour. Like her mentor Markievicz, Skinner was aware that of how dress or altered the rules she could play by. She described Markievicz as she saw her on the green at the start of the rising. The Countess stood motionless. She was a lieutenant in the Irish Volunteers, and in her officer's uniform and black hat with great plumes looked most impressive. Both Skinner and Markievicz disrupted the ways in which traditional gender order, both Skinner and Markievicz disrupted in many ways the traditional gender order with their dress and actions during 1916. However, they also both showed an understanding of masculinity and militarism, as it was only in male dress that they, as women, could really be soldiers. When Skinner took up her gun or led a military action, she was in her moleskin uniform. When she was on her bicycle delivering dispatches, she was in her grey dress. The book also provides one of the most vivid, poetic descriptions of what kind of courage was necessary to be an activist woman during the Easter week. And of course, Skinner was a very courageous woman, a very brave woman, and she continued to demonstrate that bravery and courage during the War of Independence when she was